She told me to stay behind after class. At first, I thought it was just about schoolwork. But the lesson she gave me that evening had nothing to do with books, and everything to do with her heart. The day was almost over, and the classroom had grown strangely quiet. Outside, the laughter of students echoed faintly down the hallway, fading little by little until it was replaced only by the low hum of fluorescent lights above and the occasional shuffle of papers in the distance. I was packing my bag slowly, not in a rush to leave, when I noticed that she hadn't moved from her desk. My teacher sat at the front of the room, her posture still dignified even after a long day of lessons. The sun was beginning to set, and through the tall windows, a warm golden light poured in, softening the edges of everything it touched. Her hair, dark with a few strands of silver, seemed to glow against the fading light, and for a brief moment I forgot that I was supposed to be leaving. She looked up, her eyes settling on me with a calm that immediately quieted whatever thoughts I had. "Stay behind for a moment," she said softly. The words weren't a command, more like an invitation, one that carried a weight I couldn't quite explain. My chest tightened a little as I nodded, unsure why she wanted me to stay but too curious, too drawn in by the tone of her voice, to question it. One by one, the other students trickled out. The room emptied until it was just the two of us. The sound of the last door closing echoed through the hallway, leaving behind a stillness that felt heavier than silence itself. I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall, steady and deliberate, and the faint scratch of her pen as she finished writing something on the papers before her. I sat back down in my chair, my hands resting on the desk in front of me, trying to appear calm though my mind was restless. There was something about being alone in the room with her that made the air feel different, more fragile. I was used to her as the teacher everyone admired, confident, graceful, always composed. But now, in the quiet of an empty classroom, I sensed there was another side of her I had never seen. She finally set her pen down and leaned back, her eyes lifting to meet mine again. For a second, I thought she might tell me I had done something wrong, but the look she gave me wasn't stern. It was softer, almost thoughtful. The sunlight through the windows cast shadows across her face, highlighting the small lines near her eyes that spoke of wisdom, of years lived fully, of burdens quietly carried. "Do you ever feel like time passes too quickly?" she asked suddenly. Her voice was gentle, but beneath it, there was something deeper, a weariness, perhaps, or a longing. I hesitated, unsure of what to say. But in that moment, I realized this was not about lessons or homework. Whatever she wanted to share, it was personal. And for the first time, I saw not just my teacher, but a woman. One with stories unspoken, with thoughts that reached beyond the classroom walls. The evening light grew dimmer, painting the room in shades of gold and shadow. And as I sat there, listening, I knew this was the start of something I had never expected. She rose slowly from her chair, gathering the stack of papers into a neat pile before setting them aside. The sharp, formal air she usually carried seemed to loosen as she leaned against the edge of her desk. For the first time, she wasn't my teacher standing at the front of the room delivering a lecture. She was simply herself, a woman who looked both strong and quietly tired. Her eyes lingered on the window, where the sunlight was beginning to soften into amber tones. "You know," she said, her voice low, "we spend so much of our lives chasing answers, but the questions never really end." I wasn't sure if she was speaking to me directly or simply thinking aloud, but I leaned forward anyway, drawn to the unusual vulnerability in her words. Normally, she was the one guiding us through lessons with confidence, her words precise and her tone unwavering. Now, her voice carried a faint tremor, as though each syllable was weighed with something deeply personal. She turned back to me, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "Books can only take you so far. They don't tell you how to live with regret, or how to make peace with the choices you didn't take." I shifted in my seat, suddenly aware of how close she was. She wasn't speaking as an authority anymore. She was confiding. And that simple change made my chest tighten with a mix of anticipation and empathy. "You're young," she continued, her gaze holding mine. "You probably feel like everything is still ahead of you. But one day, You'll look back and wonder about the paths you didn't walk, the people you didn't hold on to, the words you didn't say when you had the chance. The way she spoke made my heart ache in a way I didn't fully understand. I could sense there was a story behind her words, someone she had loved, or perhaps a dream she had set aside. I wanted to ask, to reach into that silence she carried, but the respect I felt for her kept me still. Instead, I listened. The room was quiet except for her voice, and the way it wrapped around me felt different than any lesson she had ever given. She shifted slightly, pulling a chair closer to mine, and when she sat down, the space between us seemed almost too small. I caught the faint scent of her perfume, warm, subtle, comforting, and it made me notice details I had never allowed myself to before. The way her hands rested gracefully in her lap, the way her eyes softened when she spoke of things that mattered. I realized then that what she was teaching me had nothing to do with academics. It was a lesson about being human, about carrying both strength and fragility, about how life can carve its truths into you in ways no book could explain. And as she sat so close, her voice low and honest, I knew this was no ordinary conversation. This was the beginning of something I hadn't expected, a lesson I could never forget. After her words faded, the room grew still again. The kind of stillness that doesn't ask to be broken, that presses down gently but firmly, demanding to be felt. She had just laid bare a part of herself that no textbook or classroom could have revealed. And I sat there, uncertain if speaking would ease the moment or disturb something sacred. The clock ticked above us, each second loud against the hush. I became hyper-aware of every small sound, the faint hum of the ceiling light, the distant muffled clang of a locker shutting somewhere down the hall, the rustle of fabric when she shifted in her chair. Yet, beneath all that, there was something else, an invisible thread strung between us, pulling quietly, insistently. Her hand rested on the desk, just a few inches from mine. She wasn't looking at it, but I was. The distance felt deliberate, as though she was testing how close she could allow herself to be without crossing an unspoken line. My breath slowed as I became aware of the warmth radiating from her skin, the kind of warmth you could feel even without touch. I wanted to reach out, but I didn't. Instead, I let the silence do the speaking, because in that silence, something deeper was unfolding. She finally glanced down, her eyes tracing the space between us before returning to mine. It was brief, but in that small look, I understood more than if she had spoken 1,000 words. I swallowed hard, trying to steady the rush in my chest. There was no mistaking the tension. It wasn't inappropriate or reckless. It was fragile, human, and profoundly real. I thought about the countless times I had seen her stand at the front of this classroom, poised and composed, her voice steady as she guided us through lessons. But here, in this moment, she wasn't just a teacher. She was a woman, caught in a pause between what she had always been and what she was allowing herself to feel. Her lips parted slightly, as though she meant to speak, but no words came. She let out a faint breath instead, her shoulders lowering in something like surrender. For the first time, she seemed less guarded. That vulnerability did something to me. It pulled me closer, not in distance, but in understanding. I shifted, leaning forward just a little, enough to let her know without saying it that I was listening, that I was present, that she wasn't alone in this silence. Her eyes softened. She didn't move away. The closeness of her hand to mine became unbearable and tender all at once. I could almost imagine the touch, the warmth, the reassurance it would carry. Yet neither of us bridged the space. The restraint only made it more powerful, more alive. The silence stretched on, not heavy now but full, as though the air itself had thickened around us, holding us in place. It wasn't just silence anymore. It was a question, waiting for an answer neither of us was ready to give. And in that fragile stillness, I realized something. Sometimes the most important moments in life are not spoken at all. They are felt, in the spaces between breaths, in the nearness of another's presence, in the silence that says everything words cannot. The silence between us had grown so intimate it almost felt dangerous, yet neither of us wanted to escape it. Her eyes lingered on mine longer than usual, as if she were measuring whether she could trust me with the part of herself she usually kept hidden behind composure and professionalism. Finally, she exhaled, her voice trembling at first before finding steadiness. "I don't usually talk like this," she admitted softly. "But sometimes the walls you build around yourself start to feel too heavy." I stayed quiet, not wanting to break her rhythm. The way she spoke wasn't casual. It was deliberate, as though each word carried years of silence before finally being allowed into the air. She glanced down at her hands, twisting them slightly before resting them still on the desk. "People think teachers are unshakable, that we're always strong, always sure of what comes next. But the truth is, we're just people too. And there are days when I feel invisible." Her voice thinned slightly at the end, but she didn't look away from me. The weight of her words sank into me. I had never thought of her like that. She was the steady presence, the anchor, the one who always seemed to know how to handle things. To hear her speak of loneliness, of invisibility, felt like being invited into the quiet room of her soul, the place no one else was allowed to see. I leaned forward a little, my elbows resting on the desk, my voice low and certain. "You're not invisible. Not to me." Her eyes widened slightly, as if she hadn't expected me to answer that way. For a fleeting second, a flicker of vulnerability crossed her face, like a curtain being pulled back to reveal something fragile and human underneath. Then, slowly, she allowed herself a small, almost wistful smile. "Do you mean that?" she asked, her voice gentler now, quieter, as though she needed reassurance not from a student, but from a man who saw her as more than her role. I nodded, holding her gaze. "I mean it. I've always admired you, not just for what you teach us, but for the way you carry yourself, the way you make people feel seen." Her lips parted as if to reply, but no words came right away. Instead, her eyes shimmered with something I hadn't seen before. Gratitude, maybe, or relief. She tilted her head slightly, searching my face for sincerity, and when she seemed to find it, she let out a soft laugh, though tinged with sadness. "You have no idea how much that means to me," she whispered. The air between us grew thick again, but this time, it wasn't silence born of hesitation. It was closeness. It was recognition. It was two people, separated by age and expectation, finding themselves standing on the same, unspoken ground. Her hand moved slightly, brushing against her sleeve as though she were debating something internally. And though she didn't reach out just yet, the way her eyes stayed on mine told me enough. She wanted to, even if she wasn't ready. In that moment, words felt almost unnecessary. Her confession and my response had already stitched something invisible between us. Something tender, something real. And as the fading light cast softer shadows around us, I understood. This was no longer about lessons, no longer about teacher and student. This was about two hearts daring to be honest, even if only in the stillness of an empty classroom. The quiet between us had grown warmer, no longer heavy with hesitation but alive with something fragile and unspoken. Her confession lingered in the air like a delicate thread, pulling us closer without either of us daring to name what it was. I could feel my heart beating faster, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. Something shifting, something new being born in the space we shared. Her eyes dropped briefly to my hand resting on the desk. I saw the faintest flicker of conflict in her gaze, as if she was arguing silently with herself. Her fingers twitched slightly, brushing against the edge of her sleeve. Then, with a slowness that made every second stretch longer, she let her hand drift toward mine. At first, it was only near, so close that the warmth of her skin seemed to reach me without contact. I held my breath, afraid to move, afraid to break the fragile courage she was summoning. And then, finally, her palm settled over the back of my hand. The touch was light, careful, almost questioning, as though she was testing whether I would pull away. But I couldn't. The warmth of her skin seeped into mine, steady and grounding, and in that simple gesture, there was more honesty than words could ever hold. Her hand was soft, delicate yet firm, carrying with it the weight of years and the quiet strength of someone who had lived fully. My pulse raced beneath her touch, and I knew she could probably feel it, but I didn't care. For the first time, the distance between us had broken, and the world outside the classroom seemed to vanish. She glanced at me, her lips parting slightly, as though she wanted to apologize or explain. But I shook my head gently, my voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to say anything." Her eyes softened, relief and vulnerability mixing in a way that made her look at once powerful and fragile. The corners of her lips curved into the faintest smile, not one of confidence but of release, like she was allowing herself to feel something she had held back for far too long. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The press of her hand against mine was enough. It was a declaration, a confession, a promise, all hidden in the simplicity of touch. I let my fingers shift slightly beneath hers, turning my palm upward so I could cradle her hand gently. Our fingers didn't intertwine fully. It was too soon, too delicate, but the small movement said everything. I was here. I accepted this. I wanted it too. Her shoulders relaxed as though a weight had lifted. She let out a faint breath, and I could feel the warmth of it in the quiet space between us. The classroom, with its chalk-dusted air and dimming golden light, had become something entirely different. It was no longer just a room for lessons. It was the beginning of a sanctuary, a place where honesty and affection could finally take root. And as her hand stayed in mine, neither of us pulling away, I understood. Sometimes the most powerful confessions are spoken not with words, but with touch. Her hand lingered in mine, and though the touch was light, it carried the weight of everything we hadn't dared to say aloud. For a moment, it felt as though the world had shrunk to the small circle of warmth between our palms. I could hear my own heartbeat drumming in my chest, steady and insistent, as if it wanted to write its own words into the silence. She let her gaze drop to our hands, her thumb brushing faintly against my skin before she pulled back. Slowly, carefully, as though releasing me was the hardest thing she'd had to do. The absence of her touch left my hand almost aching, like a candle snuffed too soon. When she finally spoke, her voice was hushed, almost breaking. This shouldn't be happening." The way she said it wasn't stern. It wasn't rejection. It was a confession of fear, of the reality pressing in from outside the four walls of the classroom. I swallowed, my throat tight, and answered quietly, "Maybe it shouldn't, but it is." Her eyes lifted to mine again, searching, full of a conflict I couldn't untangle. I saw strength in her, but also hesitation, an invisible boundary she had lived with for so long. And yet here we were, both of us stepping too close to the edge of it. She leaned back slightly in her chair, putting just enough distance between us to breathe, though her body betrayed her when she leaned forward again almost instantly, elbows on the desk, her face just inches away from mine. The tension was unbearable, not because of what we did, but because of what we both held back. Her lips parted, trembling faintly, as if she wanted to say something but couldn't bring herself to. My chest tightened at the sight, every instinct urging me to close the gap, to offer comfort, to tell her she didn't need to be afraid. But instead, I stayed still, steady, because I knew this wasn't about what I wanted. This was about what she needed. "I don't want to ruin something good," she whispered. "You've given me something tonight. Just by listening, just by seeing me. I don't want to cross a line and lose that." I leaned in closer. Not enough to touch, but enough that she could hear the steadiness in my voice. "You won't lose it. Not with me. Whatever this is, however far it goes, I won't let it take away the respect I have for you." For the first time that evening, her expression softened fully, the tension in her eyes giving way to something gentler, almost shy. She gave me a small smile, one that felt almost like a secret, fragile, but real. The clock ticked on. The classroom remained dim, painted by the last strands of sunset outside, yet the air felt alive, fragile as glass. I realized then that sometimes intimacy wasn't about touch, or even words, it was about restraint, about the choice to hold back, even when every part of you longed to step forward. And in that pause, in that shared silence, something settled between us. A mutual understanding that what we had begun wasn't reckless or careless. It was deliberate. It was real. As days turned into weeks, The eerie presence surrounding Lucio's uncle became harder for the villagers to ignore. At first, they treated the unsettling noises, the sudden chills, and the strange movements inside the old house as coincidences, or perhaps tricks of the imagination. But the events grew too frequent, too sinister, for anyone to deny. Rumors began to spread like wildfire, whispered in hushed voices at the marketplace, during afternoon gatherings, and even within the walls of the local chapel after Sunday Mass. The villagers noticed how animals near the uncle's home were constantly restless. Dogs howled in the dead of night, chickens refused to roost properly, and carabaos that grazed near the property often broke free from their tethers, foaming at the mouth as if they had seen something terrifying. Some elders, who had lived long enough to remember old superstitions, began to murmur about aswangs, creatures who preyed on the weak and were said to disguise themselves as ordinary people during the day. The house, they believed, had become a breeding ground for something unnatural. Children were strictly forbidden from wandering near the place, yet curiosity often lured them close enough to catch glimpses of shadows slithering across the windows, even when no one seemed to be inside. A few swore they heard scratching sounds on the roof at night, like claws dragging against wood. For those who dared to listen closely, there were faint cries, like that of an infant, coming from within the uncle's home, though no baby had ever been seen living there. Fear crept into the hearts of the villagers, but along with fear came resentment. People started to blame the uncle for the string of misfortunes that plagued the community. A farmer's crops withered overnight, a pregnant woman suffered complications during childbirth, and 2 young men fell mysteriously ill with no explanation from the local healer. Every calamity, every sickness, every moment of bad luck was pinned on the uncle's presence. The turning point came when a child from the village vanished one evening after playing near the edge of the fields. Search parties scoured the land, shouting the child's name, carrying torches to light the thick darkness, but they found no trace. When some men wandered close to the uncle's house, they swore they saw the faint glow of red eyes peering through the slats of the window. No one dared to confront him then, but the seed of fury had been planted. Whispers transformed into accusations. Accusations grew into a collective demand for action. The once respected elders, who usually preached patience and prayer, began to agree that something had to be done. To allow such a presence to remain was to invite more tragedy into their lives. The uncle's name was now spoken with venom, and the villagers, though still cloaked in fear, were determined to confront the darkness head-on. Lucio, caught between loyalty to his uncle and fear of the growing mob, could only watch as suspicion boiled into rage. He knew a storm was coming. Not the kind that brought rain and thunder, but the kind that would pit an entire village against one man and the shadow that followed him. If this part of the story made your heart race, imagine what comes next when fear turns into violence. Don't miss the next chapter. Hit like, share this tale with your friends, and subscribe so you can uncover the chilling truth alongside Lucio. The darkness is only beginning,